Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
I mean, that term, bloodlust, at the time was, it's a really popular term. It's been around and it always refers to battle. And it could have been something else.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and moral corruption. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery, coming to you not soaking wet by the grace of God here in raining cats and dogs, San Diego, California. I'm excited about today's stories. I'm calling the episode Wizards of Death, the true story of Russia's magic murders. First of all, we'll touch on the story of famed Russian mystical wizard and notoriously well-endowed Lazarus man, Rasputin. Seriously, Google it. Now, Rasputin allegedly had Russia's Tsarina Alexandra under his hypnotic spell around the turn of the 20th century, and he was ultimately murdered. Now, it took more than one try to kill him, but the first person to attempt to murder Rasputin was a prostitute named Kionia Gustava in 1914. And after we talk about Rasputin, then we'll go in depth with a modern murder story that has a certain inverse symmetry with that of Russia's famous mad monk. I'm talking about the story of Georgy Teramanovich Martirosyan. Excuse me for being terrible at pronouncing Russian, but he was also known as Gosha the Wizard, which is a lot easier to spit out. Russia's murder magician was a serial killer who co-opted the legends of Rasputin's mysticism to lure young women to him and then hold them under his sinister influence like trusting lambs cradled in the jaws of a wolf. Ultimately, he murdered 3 young models, women who he claimed were actually high-class prostitutes, and this all happened in 2011 and 2012. Now, why so much talk about wizards and magic along with our murder stories today? Well, I must admit I've buried the lead here. As I've mentioned in passing before, I play a card game called Magic the Gathering, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. For those that aren't, the quickest and simplest way to describe Magic the Gathering would be to call it Dungeons & Dragons the card game. Each player is a wizard engaged in battle with their opponent wizard. Each player starts with 20 life points and 60 cards in their deck, and they take turn playing their cards, or spells, until one wizard's life total falls to 0 and they lose the game. Well, Magic the Gathering has been around for 30 years now, since 1993, when yours truly was a fresh-faced, apple-cheeked 11-year-old. I loved the game then, and I rediscovered it about 7 years ago and fell head over heels once more. Now, one of the coolest parts of Magic the Gathering is the amazing original art that's created for each and every card. Art which is fantastical, magical, and incredibly emotionally and intellectually evocative. Art that conveys the functionality of the card and absolutely captures the imagination of the player. Which brings me to why I'm so personally geeked out today. You see, I have a very special guest on today's show. One of the original Magic the Gathering artists, going all the way back to limited edition alpha. A man whose work captured my young imagination in an absolute vice grip. I remember it vividly. The very first time I looked at the bottom left corner of a Magic card to see who the artist was. The name I read, the first name I ever memorized. That's right, the original master of the Magic Macabre, the Viscount of the Visceral, the Baron of Blood. A man who communicates his imagination, his interior world, in a way that will snare your mind and memory, and hold it for a lifetime. An artist capable of bringing unnatural life to a horrifying monster, and still imbuing it with a deep humanity that clutches at your heartstrings. He is, dare I say it, the most Kinda Murdery artist in the 30-year history of Magic. That's right, Anson Maddocks is here. Hey Anson, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Thanks for letting me in. I'm doing good.
I gotta tell you, I'm thrilled to have you. And I should probably mention that the Kinda Murdery logo is drawn by my friend Taylor Quayle, who I think you also know. And you're his favorite Magic artist and a huge influence on him too. So, indirectly, I feel like you have a lot of influence on how Kinda Murdery is presented to the world. And shout out to Taylor for lending me his talents. We're going to jump into the story pretty quickly here, but before we do, I figured I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions. What is your favorite magic card that you've drawn? What's your favorite magic art in your catalog of incredible magic art?
Ooh, okay. I get that question a lot, and I have an answer ready to go usually. But the truth is, I don't think I have a favorite. I have ones that I really am unhappy with, but there's a few of those. Like I don't like pyrotechnics or Life Tap. The ones I do like are, say, Cyclopean Tomb, Darylore.
Yes. Well, every great artist tends to be their own worst critic.
Sure.
I will tell you my favorite Anson Maddocks art.
Okay.
You just named one of them, Cyclopean Tomb, and hopefully Mark Teeden or any of the other great artists are not listening at the moment. But for my money, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, Cyclopean Tomb is the greatest piece of art painting in the original Magic set, I think.
Thank you.
The artistry and the quality of that illustration is just bar none. I also really like Bloodlust because I like to pump those creatures up, and because I can so clearly remember as a kid just being shocked by it. So, for those who don't know, Bloodlust is a card that implies that your creature gets a lot stronger from drinking blood, and the illustration is basically a wall of pulsating flesh and a woman, probably a vampire or a fallen angel, sort of on her knees, clutching that wall with her face full of hunger, kind of pushing her cheek and face up against this wall of flesh. And I just remember it being feeling, especially when I was a kid, sort of so explicit and edgy that I found it really fascinating.
I can't believe they accepted that, actually, because obviously it was supposed to be some guy with a battle axe or something, just mowing down, his opponents. And
right.
I was like, yeah, I was feeling a little rebellious and just wanted to try something else, and it went through. And I got a lot of flack for it afterwards.
You sort of have a history of being a little bit rebellious and punk rock in your work. Do you not? I mean, this is not the first time you've raged against the man in your own way, right?
Yeah, I just little ways, kind of, I guess it's sort of passive aggressive to do it visually, but yeah. I don't really, you don't get much traction as an artist, telling the designers, what you think about the title choice of the card. It's
right.
You have to make do with what they give you. And I just, if it was something just a little less, that term Bloodlust at the time was, it's a really popular term. It's been around, and it always refers to battle. And it could have been something else. I don't know.
You took it more literally, somebody who was literally lusting for blood.
I try to put a little bit of, sensuality in all of my pieces. Even the zombies, I try to make a little bit interesting. Like, what would it be like to be a zombie? It'd be nasty, right? You have to
a zombie with a sex drive.
Yeah. Stuffed with potpourri or something.
I personally am very glad that you have that sort of punk rock rebellious streak in your art, because I think it has everything to do with why your art is so great and so memorable and has captured the imagination of so many, because those of us who play Magic are pretty familiar with fantasy lore and a lot of the frankly incredible art that comes along with it. But as you sort of alluded to, there is a certain similarity thematically to most of that art. And so it's almost like, as a player, if you heard the name of a card, as you said, you feel like you sort of could make a pretty good guess of what that card is going to look like. But when it comes to Anson Maddocks cards, a lot of times you get surprised. And I think that's part of what makes your art so indelible and fascinating. I remember Obviously, another one of your famous cards is Llanowar Elf, and that being a common card is one that we all actually pulled from a pack or had as a kid. And I remember seeing that elf with what looked like a bone mohawk and going, man, I've never seen an elf like that before. I've read The Lord of the Rings 3 times, and I've read this and that, and I know all about these beautiful, ethereal Orlando Bloom elves, but my gosh, this is a bone mohawk elf. What the hell is going on?
You are exactly who I was trying to reach. It was like,
you did.
Do all elves have to be pretty? Do they all have to, fit the mold, or are some of them little rebels? And do they? I mean, I wanted people to look at it and go, "What the hell? It's an elf."
And I'm really glad you said that. Do all elves have to be pretty? I'm really glad you said that, because that's one of that idea really resonates with Kinda Murdery as a show. Do all stories have to be pretty? Can a story still be of value when it's horrible? And even in a larger sense, human beings as well. I mean, I do a fair amount of outreach for mental health and drug addiction and suicide, and also for people with disabilities. I myself have cerebral palsy, and I think that when you struggle with whether it's mental health or physical issues or addiction, what have you, one of the journeys that's so difficult and so important is coming to a place where you can accept and love yourself even if you're not the expectation or don't live up to what's normal or generally considered okay. Do all magical creatures have to be beautiful? I would absolutely say no, they don't. And that theme as a disabled person or a person that's struggled with other issues is something that's hugely validating and helpful in getting to a place where we can all accept ourselves. And I feel like that's part of what I'm trying to do with the show. And that's also, I think, a big part of why your art resonates with me so much. Just because you're ugly, just because you're broken, and I mean that metaphorically or literally, doesn't mean you can't be the hero. And I think there's something in your art that speaks to that as well that really means a lot to me personally.
I do try to make all the monsters sexy, so the elves go down a notch and the monsters go up a notch.
Absolutely. Speaking of sexy monsters, why don't we jump into the talking about famed Russian mystic Rasputin?
Okay.
So I am here with Anson Maddocks. We are going to uncover what truths and solve what mysteries we can, and Kinda Murdery's Wizards of Death, the true story of Russia's magic murders, starts now. All right, I should mention right here at the top that there were 3 articles that were particularly crucial in putting this episode together. There was an article on Rasputin from allthat'sinteresting.com by Kiri Piconi, an article in the Russian Times about Gosha the Wizard, and another one in the Daily Beast by Anna Nemstova, also about Gosha the Wizard. But right now, we're about to talk about Rasputin. Now, most people, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Rasputin. Even more people have probably heard of Anastasia, the daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, and his wife Tsarina Alexandra. There was a pretty famous animated movie made about her story, largely fictionalized, came out in 1997. That movie's mostly made up, but the bad guy in that movie, Rasputin, was absolutely real. Rasputin, whose name was Grigory Yefimovich, I'm sure I butchered that as well, please forgive me, was born in Siberia, Russia in 1869. You imagine, Anson, being born in Siberia as opposed to sent there because it's the world's most hellacious prison?
Well, you'd have so much to look forward to when you left, right?
Right, assuming you get to.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point, though, because Rasputin did leave, and he managed to make the most of that exodus. So as a teenager, Rasputin went to the Verkhocher Monastery in Russia, hoping to become a monk. He never completed the program, however, and instead married at the age of 19 and had 3 children. In 1906, he arrived in St. Petersburg, and shortly following was introduced to Tsar Nicholas and his wife, because they were both desperately seeking a cure for their son Alexei, who was heir to the throne and also a hemophiliac. Now, the British monarchy had a hemophiliac prince as well. I don't know. Have you seen the movie? What's it called? How can I blank on this? Have you seen the movie From Hell with Johnny Depp and Ian Holm about Jack the Ripper?
Yeah. And,
yes.
Heather Graham, I think, is it?
Indeed, yes. Well, that movie postulates that Jack the Ripper was actually the personal doctor of Prince Edward, who was the hemophiliac, I believe. But in that movie, they imagined that the prince had contracted a sexually transmitted disease from a sex worker, and that Jack the Ripper was the doctor who had been entrusted with keeping him well, who was so furious at prostitutes for sickening the prince that he went on a revengeful rampage. I guess I should have said spoiler alert, but I failed. Maybe I'll edit it back in there. So there was a hemophiliac prince in the British monarchy. Now we have one in the Russian monarchy, which I think more than anything probably speaks to not enough branches on the family tree, inbreeding, so to speak.
Wink.
Yeah, everybody was a Lannister back then. Everybody was boinking their brothers and sisters and cousins, and hopefully not mothers, but, moving on. So the Prince of Russia was a hemophiliac. His parents were desperate to cure him, and Rasputin had already developed this reputation as a magical, mystical wizard of a man who might have healing abilities that stretched far beyond those of a common doctor. And as we all know, in about 1906, your actual scientific medical doctor was probably more likely to kill you than help you anyway, so maybe they were onto something.
You went on to be a subject for medical testing, to advance future medicine.
Yeah. Yes. And to have the world's largest severed penis, Rasputin, I mean.
Severed?
Well, somehow it ended up in a jar in a museum in Iceland.
Oh, the picoline solution adds 2 or 3 inches.
Well, so that's what I was thinking, actually, is that over like 100-something years, wouldn't it just like a sponge continue to fill with water and expand and expand? I mean, maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better, but I'm with you.
We do what we can.
It's funny. I remember when I was a little kid, I got one of those sponge capsules that you put in the water, and like a week later, it becomes a giant dinosaur.
Right.
And so I feel like basically Rasputin's penis in the jar is like that, except obviously not a child's toy. Man.
Just trim your dinosaur.
So yes. Anyway, everybody listening, if you're curious, go ahead and Google like Rasputin penis, because it's a wonder of the world. It's probably worth seeing, assuming you're into that sort of thing. And you're listening to this show, so a lot of you probably are. Okay, back to it. So historians now know, as I just mentioned, that Alexei was a hemophiliac, though at the time the royal family chalked his health problems up to a weak constitution. Rasputin successfully, at least allegedly, cured Alexei and gained the trust of his mother, Tsarina Alexandra, in the process. Now, there are also those who say that he was Alexandra's lover. That's less substantiated, but certainly adds to the romanticism of this tale. And there were those who claimed that Rasputin hypnotized the boy. Others say it was dark magic. And still others wonder if the Mad Monk had any healing powers to begin with. I think in today's modern world of science and technology, most people probably just assume he was a charlatan, but he may in fact have been powered by some kind of dark magic or deal with a demon after all, and we'll get to that in a moment. So for the next 5 years or so, Rasputin had large influence over the prince's treatment. However, his presence at the palace and his time spent with the Tsarina prompted a lot of harsh critiques toward the royal family's credibility. He was this large, foreboding, kind of terrifying mystic who had rough manners and just didn't seem to belong at all amongst the Russian aristocracy, let alone as the queen's number one confidant. So overall, the aristocracy was very upset by his constant presence and apparent influence. That said, it probably had less to do with his not belonging and more to do with jealousy over how influential he appeared to be with the rulers of Russia. So Rasputin's rude and unruly behavior and his insistence that he was the Tsarina's advisor was a big issue for the royal family and for the constituents. I feel like a few of the dukes probably, were at a sporting event and went to the bathroom with Rasputin. We're standing next to him in the urinal and saw the size of his dong and just got so insecure that they were like, we got to take this guy out. That's my theory anyway. So, anyway, the general dislike and hatred toward Rasputin got worse when he predicted that tragedy would befall Russia in World War I. And that prediction caused Nicholas to head to war to try to head off the prediction of tragedy and to leave Alexandra in charge of Russia's domestic affairs. So now we have what's building into being almost like a Greek tragedy, right? Because in pretty much every Greek tragedy, somebody brings about the prophecy they fear by attempting to... Whoa.
I'm sorry.
Is that that's a Muppet?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'll turn this down.
No worries. No worries.
That was, that was me.
That's all good. Is that animal or something?
No, it was my phone. It's a scam likely,
Ah, yeah. Got it.
No, that was me being goofy.
Oh, that was your recording of yourself. Nice.
Yes. La la la.
Sounds good. You'd make a heck of a Muppet.
I'll remember that.
So, in virtually every story about prophecy, the prophecy comes true because the subject of the prophecy tries to stop it from coming true, right? Oedipus or, what have you. There's any number of them. But meanwhile, king goes to war, queen's running the country, Rasputin is her closest advisor, so functionally what happens? He becomes even more powerful and influential than he was before, and people were already mad at him. So, at this point, the Duke and other members of the royal family seek to remove Rasputin from the family's presence. They called him a witch doctor. They said he was using black magic to poison Alexandra's mind. Despite all this, historians now believe that Rasputin actually had little influence in political matters. His influence was all personal around the health of the prince, and possibly, now that the king was at war, possibly a romantic entanglement with Alexandra. So the first attempt on Rasputin's life occurred in 1914, when a prostitute named Kionia Guseva stabbed him in the gut with a dagger. This was thought to be a mortal wound. Eyewitnesses claim that Rasputin's entrails fell from his stomach, that he was literally disemboweled, and that Guseva shouted, "I've killed the Antichrist!" But Rasputin survived the attack. 2 years later, in 1916, the country's distaste for him hit an all-time high, and a group of conspirators, including Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Prince Felix Yusupov, set out to kill him. This is where the story gets kind of super wild in terms of what probably a lot of us have heard just about how damned hard it was to kill Rasputin, which is why I referred to him as a Lazarus man, because the dude just would not go down. And so here's what they did. Actually, this seems like a good time to ask you a question, Anson.
Sure.
In this case, no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't kill Rasputin. Has there ever been a time in your life, whether artistically or otherwise, where you were just trying to do something, trying to crack a nut, trying to figure something out, and you felt like no matter which way you came at it, you just couldn't crack the nut until maybe you finally did? Does anything spring to mind? That sort of dogged frustration moment, you know what I mean?
It happens more lately than it did in the past. I had a lot more confidence in the past. Now I'm really critical of my work, and it takes me some time. I take pictures of the process. So I have photographs of paintings that transform over time to something completely out of the composition that it was originally. Because I'm making little adjustments. Things get bigger and bigger, right? Because when you're struggling with something, it gets magnified when you're doing, making a visual art. It's like your mind is saying, you need to get a closer look at this, And plus, when you're painting, borders tend to get pushed out. Then what I usually have to do is either wipe it all off and start over, or just get a new surface and start over. Usually, all the things that I'm thinking about while I'm struggling with it go into action on the new piece. So
Interesting. Now, when you said when you're struggling with something, things tend to get magnified, would it be an apt, although gross metaphor to say it's kind of like when you have a zit and people are like, don't touch it, it'll just get bigger.
Yeah. Or it's like just focusing on something more to see if you can figure it out,
So ultimately, though, it sounds like through all this struggle, maybe you create something that you hadn't intended, but that perhaps is cooler or better than what you did intend. Do you feel like it often has a positive outcome?
If I didn't take photographs while I was doing it, it would be a problem. But I have all of these photographs of pieces that no longer exist because I painted over them, or it. I don't know. I think it comes down to I should probably be a little more careful about my composition before I even start. I tend to just take the surface, sketch out on it, and start painting, and assume that I'm going to figure it out as I go. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not that easy, but I do discover things that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise, when I go at it that way.
Interesting. Well, I got to tell you, as an Anson Maddocks fan, I now want to see the photography exhibit called Anson Maddocks: The Lost Works. I want to see all these pieces that never existed because you didn't like them, but I might love them. Other people might love them, but now I'm really curious.
Well, the worst thing is when I look at them now, I'm like, what was wrong with that? That was fine. Why didn't you stop there?
Oh, that's funny.
But actually, I can compile all those. It'd be kind of a cool thing to have, I think, all together.
I think there could be a lot of interest in that. I'm very interested in seeing that. So yeah, do that, please, for my sake, if nothing else.
My only fear would be that when people look at how much work I put into it, I would just come across as completely insane.
Well, but that's why we like you so much.
Yeah, I figured, I thought that might be coming. So
yeah,
I'm comfortable with that as long as it, Yeah.
It's your beautiful madness, sir. That's why we're such fans. All right, so let's hop back into trying to kill Rasputin, just like Anson trying to perfect his creation on the canvas. After being disemboweled by the prostitute, which sounds like something your average person would not survive anyway, but Rasputin's fine. So a couple years later, they got to try again. So we've got Grand Duke Dmitri, Prince Felix. They set out to kill him, and what they do is they get Prince Felix's wife to lure Rasputin to their home. Once he's there, the murder conspirators fed Rasputin wine and cakes laced with cyanide. Although it was reportedly enough cyanide poison to kill 5 men, Rasputin was unaffected. This makes me think of The Princess Bride. What you do not know is that I spent the last 5 years building up an immunity to iocane powder, right? Right. Okay. So he eats all these cyanide cakes and he's like, yum, give me some. Can I have some more cyanide cakes, please? He's totally fine. Well, the other people who are unperturbed by the lack of Rasputin dying due to poisoned cake are the people trying to kill him. They go, well, that didn't work, so let's take another shot at it. And they continue to attack him repeatedly. First, they shoot him in the back. He falls on the floor, but then Rasputin, much like some kind of a horror movie killer, like a Michael Myers or a Jason or something, despite being egregiously poisoned and shot in the back, he's still not dead.
So
he jumps.
Did they poison him? I mean, did they shoot him like that night, or was it?
Yeah, like he's sitting at the table munching down the cakes, and they're like, "Well, these aren't killing him. I guess we better just start shooting him." So
no patience.
None.
Let it do its work, man.
Yeah. No, exactly. Well, maybe it wasn't cyanide. It was actually almond extract.
It smells the same.
Yeah, right. That which seems dangerous. Maybe they ought to do something about that. But anyway, so he jumps up off the floor and then he gets shot several more times. And then it falls down again. They wrap his body in a carpet like New Jersey mobsters. They roll him up in the carpet and they chuck him in the Neva River. So his body is pulled from the river 3 days later. Although official autopsy reports differ, most of the autopsy reports state that he was clearly still alive when thrown in the water. They can tell that from the positioning of the body and probably from eventual water in his lungs, because if you're still breathing while drowning, you have water in your lungs. If you're already dead, you don't. So he was still alive despite being shot all these times and poisoned, and that he had tried to break free from the carpet before either drowning or dying from hypothermia. They're not sure which. The cause of his death is still debated. Here's where it gets a little mystical and creepy. Before he died, Rasputin told Tsar Nicholas, "If I am killed by common men, you and your children will rule Russia for centuries to come. If I am killed by a member of your family, you and your family will be killed by the Russian people." Well, he was killed by the Grand Duke, and just 2 years later, as we know, tragically, during the Russian Revolution, the Tsar and his entire family were rounded up, taken to a basement, and murdered. So was that, if not the culmination of Rasputin's prophecy, the revenge of his angry ghost? Who's to say?
Did wonders for the superstitious folks of that land, I'm sure. If it wasn't already bad enough.
Yeah. No kidding, right? No kidding. Boy. All right. So now that we've hit on Rasputin, the wizard, we're going to talk about this much more modern case of Gosha, the wizard. But before we get into that, I'd like to chat, Anson, I'd like to chat with you a little bit more. Here's one. I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask you this, but who is your favorite magic artist who's not you, and why? If you're willing to say, or you could just, if you want to say one of my favorite artists is, that's fine too. I'm not trying to, put you on the spot here.
I would be forgiven by all the other artists if I say that, my very good friend Mark Tadine is probably my favorite artist because I grew up with him, working next to him, developing my skills next to him. And it is Tadine, by the way.
Tadine.
This is a good venue to say that his name is pronounced Mark Tadine.
Wow, I'm embarrassed now. I'm going to have to go back and edit me saying Tadine out.
No. 95% of the people that I've heard pronounce his name pronounce it Tedin. So
Tedin?
Yeah.
Interesting. I've always said Tedin, and I was wrong too.
So he won't correct people. Like if they're right in front of him, if they say Tedin, he doesn't say anything. And I'm always like, if I can hear it, I'm like, it's Tadine.
It's pretty funny because he also is so legendary that he is, I guess, humble enough to not correct people.
He's a super nice guy. He's extremely polite, and some of our friends have made up jokes about him keeping frozen heads in his basement in a freezer, which I don't think is true.
So he's so kind, it's almost suspicious.
Exactly.
Like Mr. Rogers or something.
Exactly. Who would make the best serial killer, right?
Yeah, that's right. So since your kind of murderiness is on the surface, that actually makes you less threatening. We can see it. But with Mark, you're saying, I don't know about that guy. He might be into some weird shit. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, I think my mother raised me to not watch Mr. Rogers because she was afraid that I would trust people who were
in cardigans. She didn't want you to trust people in cardigans.
Yeah, people who were overly seemingly trustworthy are potentially the worst. And I was a kid. And that was the reasoning that she gave me. And she would tell me examples of things that might happen to me. And I can't even say I'm here.
Yeah. I feel you. My dad had a version of that he told me once. And of course, this doesn't apply to anyone who may be an alcoholic. And I don't mean this insensitively. But his version of it was never trust a man who doesn't drink. And what he actually meant by that was not literally drink, but if you can't see a person's vices or occasional glimpses of a recognizable darkness, then maybe they're up to some really scary shit that they feel like they need to hide all the time. Yeah. So a similar lesson as your mother was trying to impart, I think, perhaps.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So we're really suspicious about Mark to Dean's character is what you're saying. I just want to put this in quotes, I'm just teasing.
I honestly, I don't think he has a scary bone in his body. He's actually extremely funny, and I don't ever see him cutting loose and showing people how funny he is. But since I grew up with him, I had constant entertainment all the time.
That's awesome. Well, and of course his work is just phenomenal. I mean,
it's amazing.
We all love it so much. So what's your favorite Mark Tadine card? What's the one? Is there one where you're like, God, I wish I'd drawn that one, or I just love that one, or which card would it be?
There's a lot of them, but I remember sitting across from him in a cafe in like 92 or 93 probably, when he was doing Lord of the Pit. And I was thinking, graphic styles, that would save some time, and that looks really good. Maybe maybe I should do some of that. I liked he doesn't use reference very often, and he just comes up with this stuff out of his head, which we both did, but
whole back cloth, then both of you guys right straight from the head, like Athena breaking out of Zeus. That's incredible.
Well,
you know what, Anson, before you answer, I thought this was just going to be one episode, but honestly, you're so awesome and we have so much good stuff, and we haven't even told the Ghost of the Wizard story yet, and this is all just too good, so I'm going to save it. So everybody out there listening, if you want to hear more about Anson Maddocks and Mark Tadine's creative process in the early 90s, we're talking about before limited edition alpha here, guys. And if you want to hear about Russian serial killer Gosha the Wizard, who was killing back in the early 2010s and lays claim to being the 21st century's Rasputin, then come right back here this Sunday, March 26th, as I continue my conversation with legendary Magic the Gathering artist Anson Maddocks, and we dive, hanging wizard sleeves first, into the story of Gosha the Wizard. I think Anson might tell us a personal Kinda Murdery story too. So please do check out AnsonMaddocks.com. There's a link in the show notes. Call 888-MURDERY to share your feedback or tell your story so you can inspire an episode of the show. Until next time, for Anson Maddocks, I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.